the kind of stories that this building has seen. I always love to say that if walls could speak, what amazing stories the walls of the British Residency would be sharing with us, because this monument has seen stories of such a variety and scale that very few buildings, I think, in the history of the world would have seen the kind of stories that this building has seen. In the less than 200 years of its existence, or little over 200 years of its existence, this building has seen controversies, it has seen scandals, it has seen romance, it has seen conspiracies, it has seen rebellion, it has seen humiliation, it has seen betrayal, and all of these on epic scales. And each one of these is a fascinating story to talk about. The British Residency Heritage Walk that we do in Hyderabad, that we call the White Mughal Trail, is actually a 3-hour walk. And even after the 3 hours, we do feel that we are short of time. Then we could not actually share the stories that we wanted to share. So such is the richness of the story of this building. Now, culturally as well, this building is very significant because of the way it contributed to the city of Hyderabad in many ways. Now, I'm hoping you're interested in this story, and I'm hoping that you will stick with me for the next 50 minutes to listen to the story of the British Residency. Now, I would like to repeat once again that storytelling is a two-way medium. It's always created in the moment organically with the participation of the audience. So please do participate and please do respond whenever I ask questions, so that I know that I'm not just talking to myself on the screen, right? Thank you so much. If you're interested, if you're enthused about what I'm talking, please share saying that, looking forward, or enthused. Just type enthused so that I know that how many of you are actually enthused to listen to the stories of the British Residency, right? Looking forward to listening to your comments and reading your comments. And presently it is seeing absolute degradation. True, it was seeing absolute degradation, but right now as we speak, it is seeing absolute restoration, absolute refurbishment. And very soon I'm hopeful that they're going to open it up as a museum. It's just a matter of a few months and a few years. We've been following this for the last few years, and the last time I was there a few months ago, it was completely restored, and the last leg of the art restoration of the building was under progress. So not a bad story, not a tragedy at all. Thank you, Baswati Das. Looking forward. Your comments, of course, are welcome. So I'll start with the story of, thanks for your message, Mithilesh Babu, thank you Abhishek. And if there's any specific story of the British Residency that you would want to listen from me, please also type the story saying, this is a story that I want to know about, or this is a question that I have about the British Residency or the history of the city that I want to know. Please share your questions and I will address your questions in the due course of time. Thank you guys for your responses. Keep responding like this with the same kind of enthusiasm, and I'll also be continuing to share the stories with the same kind of enthusiasm. Waiting for the stories. Thank you. So the first story I'm going to share is a story of how the land was leased for the British Residency building. Now, the British Residency building sits on 70 acres of prime property right next to the river, in what was during that time, right across the heart of the city. Right, so I will look at the comments later. The comments are kind of distracting. So I was talking about how did the British resident manage to get such a prize real estate in the middle of the city, or in those days, at the prime real estate very close to the middle of the city. How did the British resident manage to get it? Now, if you understand, when the British Residency building was built in the year 1798, the dynamics between the Nizam and the British resident were very different. 1798 is a watershed year in the history of Hyderabad. It's also a watershed year in the history of India, because everything changed in the year 1798. What happened in 1798? It's not difficult for you to guess. Right? It was the year that the English gained a dominance, an upper hand over the French. Because until 1798, it seemed as if the French were the superior colonial power colonizing India. And if a few things did not happen in the British Residency and around, if a few things did not happen, history would have been very, very different. And it could easily have been the French who would have ended up ruling India for 200 years instead of the British. And I would probably be doing this session with you in French. Right? So history is strange. A few things that happen would change the course of history forever, and little changes somewhere would lead to catastrophic, drastic changes further down in the history, or further down in the future. So this is the aspect of history that I find absolutely fascinating, and I'm going to share with you some of these aspects a little further on. Facebook messages are distracting, so if somebody is messaging me on Facebook, please do not. All right, so there's a story about how the land was leased to the British resident by the then Nizam Ali Khan, who happened to be the second Nizam to rule the state of Hyderabad, the kingdom of Hyderabad. Now, this is a story that is so absurd that it is unbelievable. When I share this story, a lot of people would say, did this really happen? Is it true? It must be some myth, some folklore, it must be somebody's invention. But believe you me, this actually happened, and we have validated it. You know, it's a true story, and there are multiple versions corroborating this story throughout the centuries. So this is how the story went. When the British resident Kirkpatrick, James Achilles Kirkpatrick, when he wanted a new British residency built, because until then he was living in the quarters of a Nawab, and he had expansionist plans. He had grand vision of building a lovely, beautiful, palatial British residency in Hyderabad. So he drew up a few plans for a new residency along with an architect of the the then Madras Regiment, an architect called Samuel Russell, who was a friend of his. So he drew up very, very detailed plans for a new British residency in the city of Hyderabad, and he took them to the Nizam of Hyderabad, and he very humbly requested the Nizam, asking for a land grant so that this residency could be built. So the Nizam took one look at the plan, right, and then he said, I'm sorry, I can't grant you this land. And the Nizam was completely surprised. You know, he was taken aback, and he was wondering why the Nizam would not accede to leasing land or granting land for his plans. Now he was crestfallen and he was very disappointed, and he was about to leave when the Prime Minister of that time, he took the British resident aside and told him, worry you not, you do not worry. It's just a little thing that you have to take care of, and I assure you that Nizam will grant you the land that you want, the same amount of land. Do not worry about it. And this made the British resident a little surprised, and he asked, what's wrong? I mean, why won't the Nizam grant my wish now, and why will he grant my wish when I come back later? And what should I do so that the Nizam would grant my wish when I come back later? So this is what the Prime Minister said. You see, the Nizam does not understand the concept of scale. The plans that you have presented for the new land, they're actually architectural plans, and they are so huge, they're drawn on architectural sheets. And the Nizam felt that these plans are so huge that he would have to part with a lot of his land in order to, make this vision happen. So make this thing happen. So the suggestion that the Prime Minister gave the British resident was to recreate the same plans on a smaller card, right, on a smaller scale, and take it back to the Nizam. And he assured the British resident that this time the Nizam would agree. So the British resident did exactly as he was told. He recreated the same plans for the British residency, a palatial villa kind of a building in the middle of a grand garden, by the sea, by the river Musi, not the sea, I'm sorry. And this time he took it on a postcard, right, scaled down version of the same plan, and he requested the Nizam once again for land. This time the Nizam said, approved, right, you can have the land. So this is a true story. This happened, and such were those times. These times are so absurd that we might not believe that this actually happened, but this is a true story. Now, do you find this story interesting? If you found this story interesting, please type respond saying it's interesting. I find the story interesting. So just type interesting so that I know that you found the story interesting. Before I go to the next story is a story of what happened in 1798 in the city of Hyderabad that changed the course of history. But before that, I'd like to see a few responses from you as to how you found my story. If you like the story, say yes. If you have any other thoughts, you can also share them on the messenger comments. Thank you, Andrew. I'm glad you found it interesting. Thank you, Venu. I'm glad you found it interesting. Thank you, Murtuza. Thank you, Nizam. Was fun, definitely. This is amazing story. Thank you, Kanika. If you want the sources for this story, I'd be very happy to share them on Facebook links much later. Now, this is not to demean the Nizam or something, but yeah, I mean, in those days, things were very, very different. Right? I mean, a few people would take offense. In fact, they did in the past when we shared this story, that this is not portraying the Nizam in a very positive light. But history is history. You know, what happened happened, and you know, so there goes my story. Thank you. That's an amazing story. Thank you. You found it interesting. I'm very glad. Thank you, Sangeeta. Thank you, Sindhu Nellore, and thank you, Ramanand. So I'm glad you're enjoying the story. The next story that I will move on to is a story of how the British Residency has actually inspired one of the most popular buildings that we know in the world today. And I would ask you to guess what that building is later. But thanks for your comments. Keep the comments coming in, because these comments actually make me feel good, and you know, make me feel that I'm doing the right thing. So thank you for the comments. Keep them coming in. Why did his own courtier help the British? Because well, it's as good a guess that, you know, your guess is as good as mine, kind of a thing. I mean, I could actually give you an answer as to why help Kirkpatrick. Now, were very different. He was called the White Mughal for precisely that reason. In every way, in the manner of habit, in the manner of his food, in the manner of his dress, in the manner of how he would conduct himself, in the manner of the literature that he would read, the poetry that he would write, the dance forms and songs that he would listen to, he was a Mughal, right? He could speak fluently in Persian, he could speak fluently in Dakkani Urdu, and he would write poetry in Urdu, and he had endeared himself to everybody in Hyderabad. And in fact, the Nizam was so fond of the British resident that he gave him 3 titles, right? Hashmat Jang, it means the valorous in the war, was one of the titles that the Nizam himself granted the British resident. When I say British resident, James Achilles Kirkpatrick. Now, Nawab, he was also given the title of the Nawab, and Fakhrud Dawla Bahadur was also another title that was given to him. So he himself, ingratiated and ingrained himself into the cultural ethos of the place, and everybody loved him. So it's not surprising that the Prime Minister would come to the aid or come to the support of Kirkpatrick when this was happening. So I think it's Aristuja, the Prime Minister at that time of the second Nizam. Now these Prime Ministers, there were several of them serving every king, and the Prime Minister was actually called Mir Alam, was the title, and I believe it was Aristuja, the Prime Minister during the time of the second Nizam, but I'll have to check this, verify this, and get back to you. Now, Aristuja is an interesting name. Aristu is the Persian for Aristotle. Now, Aristu means the wise one, and I believe it's the Persian derivative of the word Aristotle, and hence we have Aristuja. Anyway, so coming back to the story of the buildings that the British Residency has inspired, from my research, one of the grandest buildings and the most popular buildings in the US has been inspired by the British Residency, and I'll share more about this. I mean, a lot of people would probably not agree to this. If you do your primary research, it might seem like this is not true, because facts could be confusing sometimes. But I'll share why I believe that the building that I'm talking about, the building in question, the most popular building in the US, was actually inspired by the British Residency. Now, can you take a guess which building I'm talking about? Which is the most popular building in the United States of America? Right? The White House, the house of the President of the US. Now do this as a task. I mean, I wish I could share pictures of, I'm not sure if people can share pictures in the comments. I don't think that's a possibility. Now the idea was that I would be sharing pictures and talking, but unfortunately because of the limitation of the internet connection here, I'm not able to do that. Maybe I could post these pictures later on my Facebook wall of this page, and you'll be able to appreciate this better. Now, British Residency Hyderabad, it has 2 views, the frontal view and the hind view. Now, and of course there's a lateral view as well. Now Google the British Residency building and look at the frontal view and look at the hind view. Now Google the White House, look at the front view and look at the rear view. It's more or less an exact replica of each other, you know. There's a slight variation in terms of the scale and the proportions, but the White House and the British Residency, they seem on the face of it to be the exact replicas of each other. And the significance, the similarity is even more striking if you look at the rear view of the White House and the British Residency. Now, I'll address the questions later. Please hold on to the questions. Now, whenever I finish a story, I'll go back, I'll look at the questions and then I'll address them. Now, when I say that the White House was inspired by the British Residency building, now this is not an established fact that you find on Google. This is something that I have a strong, strong belief, and I'll tell you why I believe that the White House was inspired by the British Residency building. If you look at the year in which the White House was built, they say it was built before the British Residency building. The British Residency was built in 1798. Some dates mentioned as 1802. It of course took a few years to build that building. So of course the date varies between 1798 and 1802. Now the White House looks like it was built earlier than the British Residency was built. A few years earlier than the British Residency was actually built. But this seems to be the case on the face of it. And if you Google inspiration for the White House building, it will give you a couple of buildings. It gives you the Lancaster House in Dublin as one of the inspirations for the White House building. And it will give you another building in Australia as an inspiration for the White House building. Now, if you look at both these buildings, they look very, very different. The Lancaster House, which is credited officially as the inspiration for the White House, and they say the White House is a copy of this building, or the plan was inspired from this building. If you look at that building and compare it with White House, the similarity is just not there. Of course, there's a very, very slight similarity. But if you look at the British Residency building, the similarity is much, much more stark, much, much more strong. So here's the thing. I believe that Samuel Russell, the architect who devised the British Residency building, after retiring from India, he went to Australia and he built another building, which is actually credited to be the inspiration for the White House. Now, the White House built, the reason why people believe that White House was built before the British Residency was that White House was built multiple times. The initial White House that was built, I think in the year 1745, if I'm not wrong, was burnt down in the year 1814. In 1814, there was a sabotage. The British burnt down the White House in the US, and a new White House was built in the year 1814. And this White House was different from the original White House. If you look at the design or the sketches of the original White House, it looks very different from what it looks like today. So I have a very strong suspicion that the White House building, which was built after the British Residency building, which bears such a strong resemblance to each other, is probably inspired by the British Residency building. Now this is something for you guys to go do your own research. Probably it will come out to be a fact, or probably it won't. But this is something that I'm fascinated about. Maybe yes, maybe not. But that's definitely worth pursuing further, and that's what I want to share. Now, this is something for you to do once you log off from this video. Just Google British Residency and White House, and let me know if you find the similarities to be striking or not. Now, if you found what I shared interesting, you can also type interesting once more, and I'll move on to the next story. Now, we're also falling a little behind time. It's 4:27, and this video is slated to be 1 hour long. So I'll quicken my pace, and then I'll share a lot more story much faster. But please do share if you found the fact that I just shared with you interesting. Right? I'm also sorry that the electrical motor, the water motor has been turned on. It might, this is some noise at the background, which I'm extremely sorry for the noise. It's the motor, and I can't really help it because I did request them to not turn the motor on. The water comes only for about 15 minutes every day, and they have to fill in the water in those 15 minutes, and hence they have to keep the motor on. So I'm extremely sorry about this. I'll try and close the door. Maybe that will help. Right, hopefully it's much better now. So please message and tell me if the background noise is a little better. If the background noise is not as distracting as before, please message and tell me. I'm sorry, I apologize about the background noise. Thank you for letting me know that you found it interesting. Thanks, Andrew, for sharing those images. If you look at the conversation on the comments, Andrew just shared some images of the buildings that I just spoke about. So you could click on those images to see what I was talking about. Thank you, Ashok. You just checked. Venu, thank you. So, all right. So let's continue. It's better. Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad that it's not as distracting anymore. I just closed my door. Yeah, closed another door. All right. So at this point, you probably heard of the most famous story of the British Residency, which is the story of the love story of Kirkpatrick and Karunisa Begum. How many of you have heard of Karunisa Begum? You know, and the love story of Kirkpatrick and Karunisa Begum. Right? Now this story has been immortalized through the book, The White Mughal, which was written by William Dalrymple. Quite an amazing book, quite a detailed story of everything that happened during that time. It's not just about the love story, but also the whole story of Hyderabad at that time. Thank you. I'm glad there's no distraction anymore. So the story of the White Mughal is such a fascinating story. Once again, the love story of Kirkpatrick and Karunisa Begum, which was a scandal, which was a passionate romantic love story that eventually led to almost averted crisis. This could easily have spiraled into a riot and a crisis, but was averted. But it definitely led to the loss of, the loss of his career for the British residents at that time. Almost. So, would you? All right. William Dalrymple is an amazing author, anyway. Right. So, if you want to listen to the story of the love story of Kirkpatrick and Karunisa Begum, just I bring it on. In the meanwhile, I've just written down a list of stories that I have to share. I'll just see which 2 or 3 stories that I'd like to share after this. Right, so don't know about their love story. Great. So if you have not heard about the love story of Karunisa Begum and Kirkpatrick, please do message and say, haven't heard of the story. Or if you have, please do message and say, I know the story. Now, either ways, I'm sure a lot of people already know this story because it's a very popular, much celebrated love story. So I will probably share aspects of the story that are not more common. The story is pretty straightforward. There was this British resident who is supposed to be an ambassador of the East India Company in the court of the Nizam, who turns a native. Now, turning a native was a phrase which was used in those days to represent those people who had an extreme liking for the local culture. Now, Kirkpatrick was actually born in Fort George in Madras. When he came to Hyderabad, he was fascinated, he was enamored by the cultural richness of Hyderabad. Hyderabad was the last semblance of the Mughal culture in India. You know, in 1798, it was still very, very Mughal in its culture, and the Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb, or the Mughal Tehzeeb that you probably read about, was still very, very much alive in Hyderabad. And Kirkpatrick was completely taken to it, and he loved being a part of that culture. So of course he did everything that a native would do. He would eat with his hands sitting on the floor. He would eat biryani. He would eat kebabs. His cuisine was completely Dakkani. His dress, he was called the White Mughal because he would wear he would wear kurtas, and he would speak to each other. He speak to everybody in Urdu, and of course he was much loved by everybody. Now, he would often frequent the weddings and parties of the local noblemen, and when he attended the party of one such nobleman's daughter, he happened to take a glance at a beautiful girl whose name was Karunisa Begum. Now, Karunisa was the granddaughter of the Prime Minister himself, and that meant that she was from a very, very elite family, and she was also a very, very prestigious, prestigious legacy that she had. Now, Kirkpatrick and Karunisa, at the first sight, they seemed to have taken a liking for each other. Now, we can say it was love at first sight. Now, Kirkpatrick kept finding opportunities to meet her again and again, and in these attempts, Kirkpatrick was actually supported by Karunisa Begum's mother herself. Now, when these secretive meetings were happening between Kirkpatrick and Karunisa Begum, what was what was the problem was that Karanisa Begum was already betrothed to somebody else. And despite, she was 14 years of age at that time. In fact, she was 14 when she was married to Kirkpatrick. And, unfortunately, she was already, engaged to another nobleman. And hence, this was quite a complicated affair. Now, to add matters to complication, to add fuel to the fire, Karanisa Begum became pregnant with Kirkpatrick's child before they actually got married. And this could have caused a big crisis, because if word would have gotten out that Karanisa Begum, the granddaughter of the then Prime Minister, and tracing her lineage all the way back to the Prophet himself, it would have really been taken as as an insult, not as an insult. I mean, people would have taken it on themselves as what is it called? Dishonorable. They would have felt that their honor would have been. You understand how it is with Indian culture in those times. So it could have easily have spiraled into a riot. It could have easily spiraled into a major crisis, but was averted thanks to the intervention of a few noblemen who got Karanisa Begum married to Kirkpatrick in a very, very secretive manner. Now, some records also mention that in order for this marriage to have happened, Kirkpatrick actually converted to Islam. So Kirkpatrick, for the purposes of marriage to Karanisa Begum, converted to Islam, married her, kept her in secrecy in the British Residency building, and this was kept as a secret from the British Governor General in Calcutta, right? And of course, all of this story is there in the White Mughal, the book. How old was the British Mughal? The British resident at that time was very young. He was about 27, 28 at that time, and Karanisa was 14, as I said. And so some accounts also mention the fact that Kirkpatrick, in fact, became a double agent and started acting in favor of the interests of the Nizam as against the interests of the British. Now, these are some accounts, of course, and when you read the book, you would have more references to all these stories. But, everything was all right until the British Governor General in Calcutta at that time, I believe it was Wellesley, if I'm not wrong. He got wind of what was happening in Hyderabad, and he instituted a commission to probe into this matter. Now, it was considered a crime in those days for a British governor, the British officer, to get into a liaison with a native. Forget a marriage. So this was a major crisis which was thankfully averted. Now, for Kirkpatrick, thankfully, his brother was in Calcutta, employed under the Governor General, who actually came to the support of Kirkpatrick, and somehow the matter was settled in a much more amicable manner. And but after that, the story just turns into a tragedy, because Kirkpatrick sent both of their children, one 5 years, the elder daughter was 5 years, and the son, I think, was about 3 years. Both of them were sent to Madras, and from there they were put on a ship and sent to London. And they never saw their parents again, because Kirkpatrick died on his way to Calcutta on a ship when he was traveling from Machilipatnam. Soon after that, Karanisa Begum she was not accepted by her own family, and they would not let her come back. And she had a relationship with this successive British resident, Mr. Russell, but he dumps her and then he moves on, and she died, a very sorrowed death at a very young age of 27 years of age in Machilipatnam. So that's a story. It's a story of romance. It's a story of passion. It's a story of scandal. It's a story of the British Commission, which investigated this whole story. It's a story of two cultures coming together. It's a story of love. It's also eventually the story of a tragic death and betrayal. So, if such stories move you, I would strongly recommend that you read the book, The White Mughal, if you already haven't. And when you come to Hyderabad and after reading the book and you visit the British Residency building, it gives you a completely different experience, completely different perspective. Because in the British Residency compound, you have the Rang Mahal, where Karanisa Begum was kept. Karanisa Begum was kept in Parda. Parda meant that she would never be visible to any of the men who visit the British Residency, and she would confine herself to the female quarters of the palace. Now, in this case, in the case of the British Residency, this was a separate palace, a smaller building built far away from the British Residency, the Darbar Hall building. And this was in the middle of a garden, which provided a lot of privacy for Karanisa Begum, and she had a staff of females comprising entirely of women to take care of her, and she would never venture out of this Rang Mahal, which was the zenana, the female quarters of the palace. Now, the British resident, of course, at this time was following the local idiom, so he kept a zenana and he kept a mardana in his own palace as well. Now, Rang Mahal today is demolished, but the entrance to the Rang Mahal, the darwaza to the Rang Mahal still exists today, and we have some very sorrow pictures of this place. It's in such a dilapidated state, in such a crumbling state that you would be, you would be at a loss to know if it would even last another monsoon. I mean, it looks as if one or two monsoons more and it'll all come crashing down, and it's taken over by vegetation and trees and everything. So, but the picture does give you a very poignant emotion when you see the picture of the Rang Mahal today, because you know the stories that have transpired in that building. Now, also in the compound of the British Residency building, in the gardens, you also find another relic, which points you to the story of Karanisa Begum, which is the miniature model of the British Residency building. Now, this is called the Doll House. There are many stories as to why this miniature British Residency building was built. Now, this miniature building is probably to the height of 5 feet or 6 feet, and it's an exact complete replica, and you can walk around it and you can look at it from all directions, and it's been created to be exactly the replica of the steps, the porticos, the pillars, everything, the palladium structure and all of that. Now, why was this miniature British Residency building created? Now, there are many stories for this. One of the stories is that since Karanisa Begum never really ventured out into the Darbar Hall or the actual residency building, Kirkpatrick got this built for her so that she could appreciate it from the confines of her zenana female quarters without having to come into the the male quarters of the British Residency, which was the actual Darbar Hall structure, the British Residency building. Now, this is one story which I find it a little difficult to believe. The other story is that the British resident, Kirkpatrick, being a British, the idea of, the culture of having doll houses when you're growing up for the kids to play is a very British tradition, and it's possible that Kirkpatrick got this dollhouse version of the British Residency building built for his two children so that they could play with dolls, with miniature dolls that they would put inside the residency building and play dollhouse. So this is another story. A third possibility is that the miniature version of the British Residency building was created as a model of the building before the actual building was built. So we don't really know what is the true story, but all the three stories are equally popular. The more romantic story is a story that Kirkpatrick got this built for Karanisa Begum because he wanted her to see it and appreciate it from the confines of her zenana, from her own garden, without having to come to the British Residency. Now, that's a story that a lot of people chose to believe and a lot of people love to believe, but such is myth, to each his own. If enough people believe a story, it gains mythical power. And stories have the power of belief. So those are some stories that I usually share on my walks that I'm sharing with you now. Now, there's about 15 minutes of talk time left, 15 minutes of this session left. So let me choose what stories to share. Or maybe I'll share the list of stories and you can tell me which stories you want to listen to so that I can choose those stories to share with you. We're waiting to see the picture. So, sure, once this session gets over, let me post the pictures that I mentioned on the Facebook page of Hyderabad Trails, along with comments, right? And you can just visit the page maybe an hour later and you'll get to see all the pictures that I'm talking about. So I'll do that much. And I again apologize for not showing you the pictures as planned at this moment, but My hands are tied. I'm limited with the internet connection here, and I'm unfortunately locked down in this place by accident. I was just traveling through and I got caught in Jaipur, in this place. So thank you so much, Kanika. I'm glad that you found that story interesting. So here, where's the dollhouse now? The dollhouse is in the garden of the British Residency building, right outside the Rang Mahal, between the Rang Mahal and the cemetery. Also, this dollhouse was completely destroyed until a few years ago. It was only about 3-4 years ago they actually reconstructed it. So there are some pictures of this dollhouse from 10 years ago when it was completely in tatters. A tree had fallen on it and it was completely destroyed, but they have recreated it now. Thank you so much. I'm glad that you find these stories interesting. Now, I'll go back to what I started with, the fact that what happened here shaped the history as we know it, right? Now, 1798 was a watershed year in the history of India because that was when, the first agreement was signed between the first agreement called the Subsidiary Alliance Treaty. The first Subsidiary Alliance Treaty was signed between the Nizam and the British. Now, this was a blueprint that was used with every other king after this. After the Subsidiary Alliance Treaty was signed in 1798, within the next 5 years, every other kingdom, from the Mysore state to the Marathas, to the Sindhias, to the Wadiyas, to Awadh, all of these came under the British through Subsidiary Alliance within 5 years, before 1805. In 1799 it was Mysore, 1799 it was Marathas, in 1801 it was the Awadh. So within 5 years or within 10 years, pretty much the whole country, every single princely state in India had come under the influence of the East India Company through the agreement called the Subsidiary Alliance Treaty. Now, what was this treaty and how did this happen? How did this treaty become so significant for the British that they would become so powerful? So this is the first story of 1798 and how what happened in 1798 tilted the balance in favor of the British against the French, because until then in Hyderabad there was a man called Monsieur Raymond who was the French military commander of the French military commander of the Nizam's forces. Now the Nizam's army had a military commander who was actually French, and his name was Monsieur Raymond. Now, at the same time, there was a subsidiary force of British soldiers who were stationed in Secunderabad, who were also under the command of the British resident. So there were two powers at play in 1798 Hyderabad. One was the French and the other was the British. Now both of them seemed to be on a seesaw. Sometimes the French were gaining an upper hand, sometimes the British was gaining an upper hand. And the Nizam at that time was completely non-partisan. He was very neutral and he liked Kirkpatrick as much as he liked the French commander, Monsieur Raymond. In fact, both of them were very dear friends of the Nizam. So this neutrality broke in 1798 thanks to the death of Monsieur Raymond, and the Nizam actually came in favor of Mr. Kirkpatrick, and then he openly favored the British as against the French, and this tilted a lot of dynamics in history. Now, if this had not happened in 1798, probably history would have been very different. Of course, along with this, a lot of other things also happened. Napoleon Bonaparte was going to come to India just around this time, and he was already in touch with the Mysore Sultanate, the Tipu Sultan, and the Tipu Sultan, who was staunchly anti-British, and the French could have combinedly fought with the support of the Marathas and the Nizam and completely routed the British. But this did not happen because Napoleon Bonaparte never made his way to India. So a few things happened along with what happened in Hyderabad. One of them is the fact that Robert Clive became the Governor General of Calcutta, who was an extremely shrewd and extremely strategic person. And Monsieur Dupleix, who was equally powerful and equally shrewd, had to leave India because he was called back by the French. And the next Governor General of the French East India Company, who came to Pondicherry, his name was Dumas. His name was Monsieur Dumas. He was not as good. I mean, he was not, he was actually the reason why the French lost. So that's, of course, one story. But the next story happened in 1857. The next story about how what happened in Hyderabad contributed to the world as we know it happened in the year 1857. And you all know what happened in the year 1857. You can comment and say in 1857 what was happening in India. And every school kid knows this. But Dushyant, I'm not saying anything against the British, because I'm not sure if the French would have gained an upper hand. I think things would have been much more difficult, because if you look at the colonial atrocities that were done in Pondicherry, the French Pondicherry, they were far, far worse. Given an option between French and the British, I have no doubts in saying that there was rule of law with the British. The British had certain rule of law, and if we were under the French, things would have been much, much worse, because if you compare the atrocities in Pondicherry with the atrocities in Chennai was much, much better. So it's not to mention that the British were evil and the French were magnanimous. No, that was not the case. The French were here to loot as well. French and the British, both of them were here for their own interests, and these interests, of course, were financial, because these were companies, the East India Company, the French and the British. So yeah, I mean, initially, of course, there was no politics. It was primarily monetary interests that brought the French and the British to India. The British strategy was better, and whosever strategy was better, of course, were the rulers. So yeah, I mean, so that's my 2 pence about the comment that somebody made. So 1857 saw the first War of Independence in India. It's also called Sepoy Mutiny by the British. It's also called the rebellion, the rebellion by Indians. Now, this rebellion actually started in Meerut, right? And very quickly it spread to other cantonment cities like Barakpur, Lucknow, Delhi, etc., etc. Now, there was some rebellion, some outbreaks in Deccan as well. Some in Aurangabad and a few other places. So all colonizers were bad exploiters, right? Now, very few people actually know that there was in fact a rebellion that happened in Hyderabad in 1857, right? And this was no small rebellion. About 6,000 soldiers rebelled, and 6,000 soldiers attacked the British Residency. The siege, or the attempt to attack or break into the British Residency, lasted a whole night, right? So there was an exchange of gunfire from both the sides, from the British Residency and from the soldiers outside, who had occupied the ceilings, or the terraces of the buildings along the main road which separated the wall of the British Residency with the city, and they were firing at the British Residency building. Now, this happened for a whole night, and 6,000 soldiers were involved. So this is by no means a small rebellion. It's in fact much larger than any of the rebellions that you heard in the other cities. But there's a reason why this episode of history is not more popular. And that's that's a completely different topic for discussion, as to how history is very political, and the history that we study is actually nitpicked and chosen for us to study, of course. And of course, when people write history, there's always a choice that is made as to what is written and what is not written, what is promoted and what is propagated and what is not propagated. Unfortunately, the story of 1857 Hyderabad has been lost in history. But let me tell you that it was no mean or no small rebellion that happened. There were two heroes of this rebellion. One of them was called Turebaz Khan. The other one was called Maulvi Aladdin. Now, dramatic stories, fascinating personalities, heroic episodes of battle. But this resulted in a tragedy, because the British won, or when I say the British Residency managed to hold its ground and managed to repel the attacks of the rebels. Eventually, Turebaz Khan and Maulvi Aladdin, both of them were captured and they were imprisoned. And of course, both of them were shot dead. It's a gruesome part of the history of Hyderabad. But what is important, what is significant is this. In 1857, when there was news of rebellion in the country, now the British already had telegraph by this time, right? Before 1857, telegraph had already come to India, and the British were already using telegraph. The Viceroy sent a telegram to the British residents in Hyderabad. The British resident in Hyderabad got a telegram from the viceroy who was sitting in Calcutta. And the telegram said, if Hyderabad is lost, everything is lost. Right? The message was simple. If Hyderabad is lost, everything is lost. Now, why did Viceroy say if Hyderabad is lost, everything is lost, right? And thankfully for the British, thankfully for the Viceroy, the Nizam of Hyderabad chose to side with the British, right? The Nizam, he actually supported the British when the 6,000 soldiers were going to attack the British Residency. The Prime Minister, in fact, sent his spies to inform the British resident in advance that there was going to be an attack on the British Residency. And the Nizam completely supported the British, and I'll tell you in what ways. Had the Nizam not supported the British, and if the British had not succeeded in Hyderabad, the 1857 rebellion could have gone differently, because the Nizam's army was one of the largest armies. The Nizam's wealth, the Nizam's dominion, territory, power was so huge that the crucial factor that determined the victory of the British in the 1857 War of Independence was the support of the Nizam towards the British. Now, this is an interesting piece of history. Now, why did the Nizam support the British? Now, the Nizam, if you see, the telegram, I'm taking a minute here to repeat what the telegram read. The telegram said, if Hyderabad is lost, everything is lost. Now, by this, what he meant was, if we lose in Hyderabad, then forget India. We're going to have to leave India, because 1857 there was rebellion happening. I mean, the fervor was so strong to throw the British out that there were mutinies happening everywhere, and it was being very, very difficult for the British to control it. If you read history, especially in Lucknow and Delhi, the kind of atrocities, gruesome massacres that have happened are extremely, how would I put it? Difficult to even read. The Lucknow Residency was attacked, and every British person who was living in the Residency was massacred, including children. Now, there were some really atrocious things that the rebels also did, that the mutineers also did, and the same thing in Delhi. Now, of course, I mean, the British retaliated once they conquered the Residency back. In Hyderabad, we have an instance where Turebas Khan was stripped naked, and he was hung from a tree in the main square of Koti Bazaar, as an example for anybody who ever thinks of rebelling against the British again. So, I mean, these were times, I mean, such were the times, cruel times and cruel actions. But I think, these are games of power. These are games of control. So they can't be anything but violent. But my point is this: why did the Nizam choose to side with the British? Right? That's a question that's open to interpretation. Now, there are many ways that you can approach it, but also the fact that the reason why this episode of telegram it will be, I did not get what that message meant. Ritika messaged saying telegram it will be, so much of research, thank you. So, the Turebas Khan, of course, has been completely obliterated from history. But folklore remembers Turebas Khan, because even today in Hyderabad, in Deccan, people say, "Jadam Turam Khan mat bano." Right? Turam Khan ban rahe ho kya tum? Are you being a Turam Khan? So Turam Khan is today an epitome of somebody who is courageous to the extent of being foolish. Right? There's even a word in Telugu called Turum. Right? Turum is actually derivative of Turam Khan or Turebas Khan. It basically means somebody who's so courageous that he's stupid. I mean, to the extent of being foolish. So Turebas Khan could not, of course, would propagate stories, but official history has completely removed references to the episode of Khan and Maulvi Aladdin. Now, it's not very difficult to guess why. People do ask me, why do you think this story has not been propagated as much as it should have? Story, because when you approach history through the lens of subjectivity, very difficult to deal with the complexity of Turebas Khan, a hero. If you're saying Turebas Khan was a hero, then he went against the Nizam. That means the Nizam was a traitor. Now, if you see the Nizams were actually Mughals, right? The Mughal Bahadur Shah Jafar in Delhi was supporting the rebellion, and the rebels, the mutineers everywhere were rallying in the name of Bahadur Shah Jafar. right? And in the name of the Mughal flag. And the Nizam, being a Mughal himself, sided with the British. So Turebas Khan is a hero if you look at it in terms of him supporting his Mughal legacy, or the Mughals. And he's a traitor if you see that he's gone against his own king. He went against the Nizam's orders, or the immediate orders of his immediate king, the Nizam. So he could easily be considered a traitor because he was being a traitor to his own king, right? So this complexity with placing both Maulvi Aladdin and Turebas Khan as either a hero or a villain, because you can't approach history without talking about what is heroic or what is not, and that raises very, very uncomfortable questions. This is the reason why I think they just played safe and said, let's not deal with it because this history is complicated. And throughout Hyderabad history, I see this happening in a lot of instances. One of them is Operation Polo as well. Operation Polo, you have no discussions, no talk. It's a taboo topic. People don't want to talk about it. People don't want to share anything about it, because when you bring out 1948 October, what happened in Hyderabad, again, there's a lot of discomfort with respect to who was right, who was wrong, what happened, all of these things. So that's the second story about what happened in Hyderabad that changed the way that we know history. If the Nizam had not decided to side with the British, we don't know. I mean, history could have been completely different. Now, the third instance when history could have been different is in 1948. Are you still able to see me? I got a message saying lost my connection. So if you're not able to see me, please message and say that you're not able to see me. If you're able to see me, please message. This is supposed to be a 1 hour session and the 1 hour is already over. So I'll quickly wrap up with one or two so it's an interesting question. Why did the Nizam supported the British? Now the answers to these questions require a lot more detail in terms of explanation, and we don't have that kind of time. Otherwise, whatever I say will be very simplistic. I'm not saying the Nizam is a traitor. I'm not saying Turebas Khan is a hero. Now things are not as simplistic as that. They're not as reductionist as that. So that's a very interesting question. I could do a whole half an hour talk on that, as to why the Nizam chose to support the British, because what happened was the culmination of what has been happening for over a century, right? There were the Carnatic Wars that happened before that. There's a treaty which was already in place with the British. Now, the Nizam, I think, had very, very little choice to do anything else. In fact, if you see, even during the World War, the First World War, the Second World War, the Nizam had no choice but to send his troops to the British. The Nizam had been the most faithful ally of the British. In fact, he's been rewarded with such titles as His Exalted Highness, the most faithful ally of the British, etc. and etc. And the Nizam was even knighted, and he refused to be knighted because the Nizam did not want to have the same title that some of his subordinates had. Some of his subordinates, the Nawabs, who were much lower than him in the hierarchy, were knighted, and the Nizam, of course, didn't want to be on the same par as some of his subordinates. So, if I'm back, thank you. So yeah, that's an interesting question, but answers to questions like that require a little detail in exploration, so which we do not have the luxury of at this moment. So when you come on a walk, the next time we can discuss that in detail. My friend Ekta is a very, very regular heritage walker with us. In fact, she shows up almost every weekend whenever we do a heritage walk. Please continue if you can for some more time. Lots of audience. Thank you so much. So if you find what I just shared interesting, please type and say interesting. That's the only way I know that you're liking what I'm saying. Otherwise, all that I'm able to see on the screen is my own face, which is very weird for somebody who's not used to doing these things. It looks like I'm talking to myself. But when you have when you send me comments, it's a good feeling. I know that okay, people are listening, so I can continue to talk. Okay, now thank you. So the third story is in 1947, when India became independent. The British, of course, left India, but what was to become of the state of Hyderabad? 200 years before leaving India, the British got into an agreement, a treaty with the Nizam, saying that we take responsibility of your army, we take responsibility of your interests, and there was a mutual interest treaty that they had entered into in 1798, right? And for all practical purposes, before this treaty was signed by the British and the Nizam, Hyderabad was an independent kingdom with its own flag, with its own currency, with its with its own flag, with its own king, right? So in every way they were their own kingdom. And in 1947, if you look at the state of Hyderabad, they had their own railway, they had their own airways, they had their own post, they had the stamps, they had their coinage. So in every way, in 1947, when the British left India, Hyderabad could easily have become an independent country if only the British supported the cause of Hyderabad. Now, this is something that was seen as the betrayal by the British of Hyderabad. And a lot of old people in Hyderabad actually feel that the British betrayed Hyderabad's interests, because the Nizam was hopeful that the British would recognize the independent status of the state of Hyderabad. But Lord Mountbatten, the last Governor General to leave India, did not. In fact, he refused to even, he never spoke to the Nizam, he never responded to his messages. So it was actually a very rude way in which Mountbatten left India, and that was a lot of time. That was a time of turmoil between 1947 and 1948, when, of course, the British resident left British Residency, and the British Residency was taken over by the Nizam, and it became his foreign office. So the Nizam kept sending letters of appeal to the British, and some of these are very, very touching and very, very poignant. They appeal. They make a very, how do I put it, a very humbling appeal, saying, we've been so loyal to you for 200 years, we supported you in the First World War, Second World War, we supported you in the rebellion of 1857, and now when we need your support, you're leaving. All we need you to is to acknowledge and recognize our independence of Hyderabad. But Mountbatten was a friend of Nehru, and that didn't happen. And of course, it's a big story. 1947 is a long story. It's a 2-hour story in itself. Everything that happened, But yeah, 1947 is another. 1948, in fact, October is a watershed year in the history of Hyderabad because of what happened. Now, interestingly, there's a telegram that was sent from the British Residency office in 1947 to the Foreign Office in London, right? And this telegram was sent in a crypt, in a Caesar cipher. Caesar cipher is a crypt code that is employed on the text, and then you have a jumbled up piece of text that is sent as a telegram. And this telegram was received by the London office and filed in the British Records Office, which is now available in the British Library of London. So one of our friend who does heritage walks with Hyderabad Trails whenever he comes to Hyderabad, otherwise he lives in New York, every time he comes to Hyderabad, he makes a stopover in London, visits the British Library, digs out a lot of stuff for research, comes to Hyderabad and organizes walks with us. So on one of his visits to London 2 years ago, he brought a telegram that he found in the British Library, which was this telegram sent by the Nizam. Now, this basically made a very humbling appeal to the British Prime Minister, saying, you have to stop the Indians from annexing us, from conquering us. Now we are under the threat of imminent attack from India, and we appeal to you. We appeal to you for your support and for your help. And the Nizam had also sent appeals to all the countries in the world, asking them to recognize the independent status of Hyderabad. I think about 25 Islamic countries acknowledged that Hyderabad was an independent state. He had written to the UN. So anyway, so this is a whole lot of story, but I want to tell one particular scene. I want to recreate one particular scene right now, which is during the times of the last Nizam, Usman Ali Khan. Now, Usman Ali Khan, whenever he would visit the British Residency, there was a very strict protocol that was observed. Now, the British Residency building, if you see the pictures, there's a grand Palladian entrance with 39 steps, I believe, 39 steps with 2 imposing lions on both sides of the staircase, and grand, tall pillars supporting the Greek column, the Greek triangular roof ceiling. So whenever the Nizam would attend any official gathering in the British Residency, there was a very strict protocol that was followed. So the Nizam was somebody who was who was a law unto himself in Hyderabad. He was the law. He was the most powerful person. He was the rule. But the only person who would not not be subservient to the Nizam was the British resident. When the Nizam would go in his car, nobody could cross his car. If you were crossing, you would just stop your car, or if you're riding a bicycle, you would get off your bicycle, stand by the wayside and let the Nizam pass and then continue on your journey. But the only person who would not stop for the Nizam was a British resident, because he was of course a higher power than the Nizam himself. So when the Nizam would come, his car would pull into the driveway in front of the grand 39 step staircase. And the British resident would not come down to receive the Nizam. The British resident would not walk down the 39 steps to receive the Nizam and then take him all the way up. Now he would do that if the Viceroy was coming. He would do that when the Dukes and Duchesses of Britain would come. He would do that when any other foreign ambassador would visit. But when the Nizam would visit, he would just stay at the top of the stairs, and he would send his assistant resident to walk down to receive the Nizam. And the assistant resident would accompany the Nizam up the 39 steps, and that is where the resident officer the British resident would, shake his hand and then invite him and take him in, take him inside, escort him inside. Now, this is an interesting thing to see, because for somebody who was so powerful, the Nizam, the richest man in the world. The fact that the British resident would not walk down to receive him is something that he could not be very comfortable with, and that defined the relationship between the British resident and the Nizam. It was an uncomfortable relationship, which was a relationship of convenience, but there was always a certain discomfort that the Nizam felt. And when the Nizam would walk up the 39 steps, there was a band of what is that instrument? The pipe instrument, right? So there's a band of musicians who would stand on the stairs on both the sides, and they would play the organ pipe. And on the organ pipe, they would play a tune which was always played only when the Nizam would come, and that was Nizam's favorite tune. And this tune, you would be surprised, was actually a jazz song. The Nizam in his earlier days used to love jazz, and his favorite jazz song was a song called "I'm Forever Blowing Bubbles." Right? It's called "I'm Forever Blowing Bubbles." So whenever the Nizam would get off his car, the band would start playing "I'm Forever Blowing Bubbles," in that tune, and the Nizam would walk up, and then he would be received and he would be taken inside. Now this is something that we actually recreated on one of our walks with the British resident, with our dear friend Andrew, who's the British Deputy High Commissioner at the moment, and who also would have been the British resident if the British were still here. And he would play the role of the British resident, and our dear friend Aravind Acharya, who's a historian from New York, he would play the role of the Nizam. And we actually created it by playing the tune just for fun, and these are some very interesting experiences that we get to enjoy on our heritage walks. So it's been more than 1 hour and 10 minutes, and of course there are more stories that I could share, and there are more stories that I had intended to share, but time is always a luxury. And I had promised India Heritage Walks that I would not go beyond 1 hour. Despite that, I've unfortunately, I had to overshoot it by about 10 minutes, and I apologize to India Heritage Walks for that. But I think this is how much we can do today. But we'll continue this. If you liked this session, if you enjoyed it, we can do further sessions in the future. And whenever I have a better internet, we can actually do pictures and stories. Hyderabad is a rich city in terms of heritage. We have done probably 50-60 different heritage walks in the city, and each one of them is fascinating. And there's always more opportunity for. Alright, there's actually much more opportunity for such walks in the future. So thank you so much. We close now, but before closing, I would love to hear from you how this session went. So please do share how you liked the stories, or if you have any ideas or any thoughts or any questions. Once this video gets over, probably will not get that opportunity. So please do share your thoughts and your ideas or your appreciation, or if you're interested in more such sessions in the future, please comment. We can maybe request India Heritage Walks to host similar sessions in the future as well. Right? Would love to host them for India Heritage Walks or otherwise. I love storytelling and I love sharing these stories. So please be generous with your comments, and please do let me know what you think about it. Right? Thank you. I would also love to know how many of you are from Hyderabad and how many of you are joining from outside Hyderabad, because that would be That would be a real indicator for me to see how many people outside Hyderabad are actually interested in these stories. So if you're from outside Hyderabad, please do share that you're not from Hyderabad but you enjoyed this session as much. And the stories of Hyderabad are timeless. The stories of Hyderabad are not limited to geography. The stories of Golconda, the stories of Charminar, the kings, the Qutub Shahis, the Nizams who ruled here are fascinating, fascinating stories. And unfortunately, Hyderabad history, heritage, culture is not as popular as that of Delhi or Lucknow. Everybody knows that there's a lot of history in Delhi, a lot of heritage, a lot of stories in Delhi. For that matter, in Calcutta, Lucknow, Bombay, other cities, Madras as well. But Hyderabad, despite having so much, is unfortunately not as much on the map, not as much as in the thoughts of people when it comes to historical heritage cities as much, and we're trying to change that. I'm sure through these sessions and through these talks, we'll change the perception that Hyderabad is a rich historic heritage city. Thank you so much, Riyaz Khan, Prakash, Shalini, Binusha. Thank you, every single person. Thank you for coming. It's been a lovely experience for me, and I'm extremely grateful to you for coming here and taking part in this walk. So thank you. With a lot of gratitude, I'm going to sign off. That's goodbye from me from Jaipur. Thank you. Bye-bye. Also, I forgot to acknowledge that I want to thank Mr. Dr. Andrew Fleming, our very dear friend, for joining this session and also for supporting me in all of these endeavors, and India Heritage Walks for agreeing to host this and support and collaborate on this. Also my team members, especially Ritika, who's been on this throughout the day trying to help me fix a few things but didn't really happen, and also my team members, my interns and volunteers in Hyderabad Trails, for giving their time and efforts into researching all these stories and sharing them with people. Thank you. Goodbye.